Alright, y'all, let me hit you with the lowdown on the first part of Looking for Alaska by John Green. Picture this, Miles Pudge Halter is this lanky, awkward dude whose idea of a good time is memorizing people's last words. Seriously, last words are his thing, quirky or low-key creepy? You decide. Anyway, his life in Florida is about as exciting as a loading screen, so he decides to dip and head to Culver Creek Preparatory School in Alabama. Why? Because he's chasing what Francois Rabelais, some old dead guy, called the great perhaps. Big brain energy, but also kind of existential crisis why. So, Pudge arrives at Culver Creek, and right away, the vibe check is intense. The place is hot, sweaty, and crawling with mosquitoes, like the worst survivor challenge ever. But then he meets his roommate, Chip the Colonel Martin, who's got big chaotic leader energy. This dude is a 5-foot powerhouse with a chip on his shoulder, pun absolutely intended, and a habit of calling rich kids weekday warriors because they only hang out at school on weekdays before heading home to their mansions. The Colonel has a grudge the size of Texas against them, and honestly? Mood. Next, Pudge gets introduced to Alaska Young, and oh my god, she is an absolute fever dream of a person. Think Manic Pixie Dream Girl energy, but with way more depth and mystery. She's beautiful, wild, and chaotic, like if Harley Quinn had a library card and a penchant for quoting literature. Alaska's the kind of girl who says things that sound profound but also make you wonder if she's low-key messing with you. Pudge is immediately smitten, obviously, because who wouldn't be? She's like the main questline in a dating sim, impossible, alluring, and guaranteed to break your heart. The squad quickly rounds out with Takumi Hikahito, who's got stealthy ninja vibes and an endless supply of hip-hop references, and Lara Buterskaya, this sweet, slightly awkward girl from Romania who's way too good for all the chaos these people drag her into. Together, they're like a dysfunctional party in an RPG. The Colonel's the strategist, Alaska's the wild card, Takumi's the rogue, and Pudge, well, Pudge is basically the noob trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Now, life at Culver Creek isn't all midnight pranks and deep convos. There's a brutal hazing culture, and Pudge gets baptized into it early on when some weekday warriors duct tape him and toss him into the lake. Survival instincts? Questionable. He barely avoids becoming gator food, and instead of being mad, he's just kind of intrigued. This boy is running on curiosity and adrenaline, I swear. But Pudge's real initiation into Culver Creek life happens when Alaska and the Colonel pull him into their world of pranks, smokes by the lake, and philosophical debates that somehow feel more important than homework. One of the squad's first missions is a classic prank war move. The Colonel cooks up a scheme to take revenge on the weekday warriors for Pudge's lake dunking, and let me tell you, this plan is more elaborate than a Final Fantasy side quest. It involves Alaska distracting the Dean, Dubs the Eagle, with some fake drama while the rest of them unleash their wrath on the warrior storm. Chaos ensues, and honestly? It's legendary. Between all the shenanigans, Pudge starts getting pulled deeper into Alaska's orbit. She's like this walking enigma. One moment, she's laughing and lighting up the room, the next, she's brooding and distant, dropping cryptic lines about life and death. She's obsessed with this idea of the labyrinth of suffering, quoting her favorite book, The General in His Labyrinth. Pudge doesn't totally get it, but he's hanging on her every word like she's his Twitch streamer of choice. Alaska's whole vibe is like, I'm here for a good time, not a long time, but there's also this undercurrent of something darker, and Pudge is dying to figure her out. Meanwhile, there's some spicy romance drama brewing. Alaska decides Pudge needs a girlfriend, so she ropes in Lara, who's adorable and clearly into him. Cue one of the most awkward dates in YA history. They go to a basketball game, and Pudge ends up getting clocked in the face by a stray basketball. Smooth moves, Pudge. Even worse, he spends the rest of the night throwing up on Lara's shoes because of a concussion. Honestly, it's giving flop era, but Lara still likes him somehow, proving that miracles are real. The deeper Pudge gets into this new world, the more he realizes how much he was sleepwalking through life before. His friendship with the Colonel, Takumi, and Alaska opens his eyes to the messy, beautiful, tragic chaos of being alive. They're not just pulling pranks and breaking rules, they're searching for meaning in all the absurdity. Alaska, in particular, is like a human embodiment of Attack on Titan, fierce, unpredictable, and always on the edge of something devastating. One night, as they're chilling by the lake, Alaska shares a deeply personal story about her mother's death and how she feels responsible for not saving her. It's a gut punch moment that gives Pudge a glimpse of the weight Alaska's been carrying. It's clear she's not just the carefree, rebellious girl he idolizes, she's complicated, haunted, and trying to navigate her own labyrinth of suffering. For Pudge, it's like leveling up in his understanding of her, but it also leaves him with more questions than answers. By the end of these chapters, Pudge is fully immersed in this world of wild nights, big questions, and even bigger feelings. He's falling for Alaska, but it's not just a crush, it's like she's rewiring his brain, making him see life in Technicolor instead of grayscale. Alaska is the storm he never saw coming, and even though she's unpredictable and messy, he can't help but be drawn to her. She's the spark that's igniting something inside him, and he's not sure if it's going to light his way or burn him down. So there you have it, Pudge's Great Perhaps is officially underway, and it's already a whirlwind of laughs, heartbreak, and existential vibes. Welcome to Culver Creek, where nothing is simple, everything is intense, and life hits harder than a Mario Kart blue shell at the worst possible moment. Alright, let's dive back into the chaos of Looking for Alaska and pick up where we left off. Pudge is still trying to survive Culver Creek, a wild mix of high-stakes pranks, existential musings, and his low-key obsession with Alaska Young. These chapters are like that part of a game where the main character grinds XP, levels up their relationships, and discovers some side quests that might just wreck their whole vibe. Spoiler alert, emotions will be farmed. So, it's 110 days before the moment, you know, the one we're counting down to, but pretending we don't know is coming, and life at Culver Creek is feeling like one of those Netflix coming-of-age dramas, except with more cigarettes and algebra homework. Pudge is finally starting to feel like part of the squad, but let's be real, Alaska is still the star of his mental playlist. She's got him whipped harder than a Mario Kart power slide, and he's just vibing, hoping she'll keep letting him orbit her chaotic brilliance. The Colonel is still pulling his classic small dude with big plans energy, and Alaska is, as always, doing her best impression of a human paradox. 1 minute, she's hyping everyone up to plan the ultimate prank on the weekday warriors, the next, she's spiraling into deep, cryptic reflections about life, death, and suffering. Honestly, it's like hanging out with someone who switches between Joker chaos and Aang's avatar wisdom without warning. One of the big highlights of this stretch is Thanksgiving break, when Pudge decides to stay at Culver Creek instead of going home. It's giving very chosen family vibes, as he ends up spending the holiday with Alaska and the Colonel. Alaska drags Pudge into her deep bag of quirks and questionable choices, like her obsession with setting off fireworks and flirting with danger, literally and metaphorically. Imagine a high-energy anime protagonist who uses chaos instead of a sword, and you've got her vibe down. Thanksgiving dinner itself is peak Culver Creek energy. Alaska smuggles in food, and the three of them sit around talking about everything from the absurdity of tradition to why turkeys are such ridiculous animals. It's all fun and games until Alaska starts dropping more hints about her mysterious past, like how her mom's death still hangs over her like an unfinished side quest she can't figure out how to complete. Pudge, bless his clueless little heart, doesn't fully get it, but he's there for her in his own awkward way, soaking up every detail like he's trying to unlock a hidden achievement in her psyche. Then, there's the prank war. Oh, man, this is where things really pop off. The squad decides it's time for a legendary retaliation against the weekday warriors. Picture a heist movie, but instead of stealing diamonds, the goal is maximum embarrassment and minor property damage. The plan? Epic. The execution? Chef's kiss. Pudge and the gang sneak into the warriors' dorms and execute a prank so iconic it would make TikTok pranksters weep with envy. The highlight? Switching out the warrior kid's hair gel with something unfortunate and stealing their toothpaste. Petty? Sure. Hilarious? Absolutely. During all this chaos, Pudge and Alaska's connection keeps deepening. She has this way of making Pudge feel like he's on the brink of discovering some great truth about the universe, or at least about her. They have these late-night conversations that are equal parts flirty and deep, like Alaska's trying to drag him out of his comfort zone while also dropping philosophical breadcrumbs for him to follow. At one point, she casually quizzes Pudge on his favorite last words, because of course she does, and he hits her with Simon Bolivar's famous line about the labyrinth of suffering. Alaska, who's basically the queen of living in the labyrinth, latches onto it like it's the key to everything. It's one of those moments where you can feel the weight of her thoughts, even if she's not saying everything out loud. Meanwhile, the Colonel is out here being the Colonel, dragging everyone into his master plans while also low-key keeping the group grounded. He's got this whole thing about loyalty, like, if you're in his squad, you're ride or die. He even opens up about his own struggles, especially with money, and how his mom's working her butt off to keep him at Culver Creek. The Colonel might come off as tough, but he's got more layers than an ogre, or an onion, depending on your pop culture preference. Things get a little more complicated when Pudge starts spending more time with Laura. She's sweet, smart, and totally into him, which would be great if he weren't still laser-focused on Alaska. They go on another awkward outing, this time to a basketball game where, shocker, Pudge manages to embarrass himself again. Classic Pudge move. Lara's patience deserves a gold medal at this point. Back at school, Alaska continues to be Alaska, enigmatic, bold, and just a little self-destructive. One of the standout moments is when she talks about how she feels trapped by the past, like the labyrinth isn't just a metaphor but a very real thing she can't escape. She's wrestling with guilt over her mom's death, and Pudge, bless his soul, is still trying to piece her together like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. She's both the firework lighting up his life and the smoke clouding his judgment, and honestly, relatable. As the countdown ticks closer to whatever's coming, the group feels tighter but also more fragile, like they're all holding on to something they don't quite understand. The pranks, the late-night conversations, and the little moments of connection, everything feels like it's building towards something huge. Pudge doesn't know it yet, but he's in for a plot twist that's going to shake him to his core. For now, though, he's just a boy, standing in front of a labyrinth, asking it to reveal its secrets. And Alaska? She's the labyrinth personified, beautiful, confusing, and impossible to escape. Alright, buckle up, because these chapters of Looking for Alaska are where things go from quirky boarding school sitcom to Attack on Titan level emotional wreckage. The countdown is ticking down, and let me tell you, every day is another plot twist in this wild ride called life at Culver Creek. We're talking pranks, drama, and enough existential vibes to fuel an entire Reddit thread. So, 67 days before the thing, life is vibing at Culver Creek, but there's this undercurrent of tension, like when you're exploring a dungeon in a video game and the boss music starts playing faintly in the background. Pudge, our awkward, lanky protagonist, is still hopelessly fixated on Alaska, the human equivalent of a TikTok trend, here 1 minute, gone the next, and impossible to understand. He's hanging on her every word like she's the narrator of his favorite audiobook. Meanwhile, Lara is still out here being the sweet, sensible option, but let's be real, Pudge's emotional GPS is locked on Alaska, and there's no recalculating. The squad is still in full chaos mode, with the Colonel cooking up pranks that would make even a seasoned gamer proud. At one point, Alaska ropes Pudge into helping her orchestrate a distraction for one of their schemes. She has this genius plan to send the eagle, that's the dean, off on a wild goose chase so they can sneak around and wreak havoc. Watching Alaska operate is like watching a speedrunner break a game's mechanics, impressive, chaotic, and slightly terrifying. But here's the thing about Alaska, she's not just chaotic for the sake of it. She's got layers, and those layers are starting to peel back like the world's saddest onion. There are moments where she's the life of the party, lighting up the room with her laugh and her reckless energy, and then there are times where she's brooding, staring off into the middle distance like she's in a Netflix drama, and you just know something's weighing her down. She talks a lot about the labyrinth of suffering, quoting her favorite book and dropping nuggets of wisdom that feel like riddles you can't solve. One of the standout moments is the best day/worst day conversation, which is peak friend group bonding. They're all chilling in Alaska's room, sharing stories about their lives. The Colonel talks about his mom, who's working hard just to keep him at Culver Creek, and you can feel the respect and love he has for her. Alaska, on the other hand, reveals that her best day was when she found out she was going to Culver Creek, and her worst day was when her mom died of an aneurysm right in front of her. The way she tells it is raw and unfiltered, like she's unloading a burden she's carried forever. Pudge listens, completely shook, because Alaska isn't just this untouchable goddess in his mind, she's real, complicated, and deeply haunted. Meanwhile, the Colonel's loyalty game is as strong as ever. He's still beefing with the weekday warriors, but his real focus is on keeping his crew tight. He's like the party leader in an RPG who makes sure everyone's stats are balanced and no one gets left behind. Even when things get messy, and they do, he's the glue holding it all together. As we move closer to the 4 days before Mark, the group pulls off one last legendary prank, and it's straight out of a heist movie. They manage to mess with the eagle in a way that's equal parts genius and reckless. Alaska's the mastermind, of course, pulling strings and making it all look effortless. Pudge is just happy to be along for the ride, like the NPC who accidentally stumbles into the main quest. But even during the high of the prank, there's this sense that things are shifting. Alaska's mood swings are getting more intense, and Pudge is starting to realize that she's not the free-spirited dream girl he's built her up to be. She's unpredictable and self-destructive, and there's a darkness to her that he doesn't fully understand. It's like he's playing a game with a storyline that keeps getting more complex, and he doesn't have the manual to figure it out. The night of 4 days before is where everything reaches a boiling point. Alaska, Pudge, and the Colonel are hanging out in their usual late-night vibe, drinking and talking about life. Alaska starts spinning stories and getting philosophical, and then she kisses Pudge, completely out of the blue. For Pudge, this is it, his main character moment. He's been waiting for this since the first day he laid eyes on her, and now it's happening. But just as quickly as it starts, it stops, because Alaska is Alaska, and nothing with her is ever simple. Then, out of nowhere, she freaks out. She gets this urgent, panicked look and says she has to leave. No explanation, no context, just full-on chaos mode. She's crying and yelling at Pudge and the Colonel to help her, and because they're loyal to a fault, they do. They distract the eagle so she can sneak off campus, but no one knows where she's going or why. It's like the final cutscene in a game where everything unravels, and you're left staring at the screen wondering what the heck just happened. By the time these chapters end, the squad is in shambles. Pudge is dazed, the Colonel is confused, and Alaska is gone, literally and figuratively. The vibe has shifted from carefree rebellion to something darker, and you can feel that whatever's coming next is going to hit like a boss fight you're not ready for. And that's where we're at. Pudge is tangled in Alaska's web, the Colonel is trying to hold it together, and Alaska is a storm that's left chaos in her wake. The countdown is almost over, and let's be real, nobody is ready for what's about to happen. Alright, y'all, grab your emotional support plushies because we're diving into the Looking for Alaska pre-finale stretch, and it's about to get messy, like, someone just rage quit during a boss fight messy. The countdown clock is ticking louder than a horror movie soundtrack, and every moment feels like foreshadowing on steroids. So, it's 3 days before whatever apocalypse is looming, and things at Culver Creek are tense, but still kind of vibey. Alaska, of course, is Alaska, flirty, moody, and spinning webs of mystery like she's auditioning to be the next Spider-Man villain. She's got Pudge and the Colonel wrapped around her finger as usual, and our boy Pudge is eating it up like it's the last slice of pizza at a gaming marathon. Meanwhile, the Colonel is trying to hold the squad together with his signature mix of loyalty and sarcasm, and honestly, props to him for dealing with this level of emotional chaos. During these days, Alaska is basically running the drama show. She's acting extra cryptic, dropping philosophical one-liners like she's farming existential XP. 1 second, she's laughing and drinking with the boys, hyping up their legendary prank game, the next, she's staring into the void, clearly battling demons she refuses to name. Pudge, ever the love-struck fool, is still convinced she's the answer to all his big questions, even though it's painfully obvious she's more like a riddle that no one can solve. Now let's talk about the night before the night. It starts off chill, like a low-stakes side quest. Alaska, Pudge, and the Colonel are hanging out in their room, getting drunk, because that's their idea of peak bonding, apparently, and playing this game where they ask each other random questions. It's all fun and games until Alaska throws down the emotional equivalent of a nuke. She's like, what's the most important thing you've ever done, and then doesn't even answer her own question, which is just peak Alaska energy, dropping the mic and walking away. But then, things get real. Alaska opens up a little, talking about how much she hates herself sometimes, and you can tell this isn't just a drunk overshare. It's like she's peeling back a layer of armor, and for a moment, you can see how much pain she's carrying around. Pudge and the Colonel don't really know how to respond because, let's be real, what do you say when your friend drops a truth bomb like that? They just roll with it, hoping laughter and more drinks will lighten the mood. By the time the last day rolls around, you can feel the storm brewing. It's like when you're playing a game and all the NPCs are like, "Are you sure you want to proceed?" There's no going back from here. The squad is still riding the high of their pranks and camaraderie, but Alaska is unraveling. She's crying 1 minute, kissing Pudge the next, and then spiraling into a full-on panic attack when she remembers something she forgot to do. She's yelling, slamming things, and begging Pudge and the Colonel to help her sneak off campus. She's in meltdown mode, and it's clear that whatever's going on in her head is way bigger than anyone realizes. And because they're her ride-or-die crew, Pudge and the Colonel don't even hesitate. They distract the Eagle so Alaska can drive off into the night, even though they have no clue where she's going or why. It's chaotic, messy, and totally Alaska. Pudge is half-swooning because, in his mind, this is just another chapter in their epic love story, while the Colonel is clearly sketched out but rolling with it because loyalty is his whole thing. And just like that, Alaska is gone. She speeds off into the darkness, leaving Pudge and the Colonel behind with a million questions and zero answers. The vibe shifts hard, from carefree rebellion to this gnawing sense of dread. It's the kind of moment where you know things will never be the same, but you don't know exactly how yet. Pudge is left reeling, replaying every word, every kiss, every cryptic clue Alaska ever dropped, trying to piece together the puzzle of her. As the countdown hits 0, everything feels suspended, like the moment before a screen fades to black. Alaska is out there somewhere, chasing whatever ghost or demon she can't outrun, and her friends are left staring into the void she left behind, completely clueless about what's coming next. It's a lot, y'all. This part of the story is messy, emotional, and raw, just like Alaska herself. Pudge is trying to make sense of her, the Colonel is trying to keep it together, and Alaska? She's a storm that's already passed but left chaos in its wake. This is the calm before the real storm, and trust me, no one's ready for what's coming next. Alright, fam, let's get into the post-chaos world of Looking for Alaska, Part 2, where the vibes go from quirky coming-of-age to heavy emotional weight, like someone switched the playlist from pop bangers to lo-fi sad beats. The gang is trying to pick up the pieces after Alaska's shocking exit, and spoiler alert, it's not going well. We're about to deep dive into grief, guilt, and all the messy feelings that come with losing someone who is basically a human whirlwind. It's the day after, and everything feels wrong. Alaska's not just missing, she's gone. Like, forever. The Eagle delivers the gut-punch announcement that Alaska died in a car crash, and the news hits harder than a crit in a boss fight. Pudge is straight up glitching out. He can't process it, like someone just rage-quit his entire reality. 1 minute, he was making out with Alaska and imagining his rom-com ending, the next, she's gone, and all he's got left are the memories and a gaping hole where she used to be. The Colonel, on the other hand, is handling it like a player who's just lost their healer mid-raid, full-on denial and anger mode. He's pacing, shouting, and trying to piece together what happened, refusing to believe Alaska would just dip like that without some deeper reason. The two of them are stuck in this weird emotional purgatory, torn between blaming themselves and trying to figure out what led to that fatal moment. And honestly? Same. In the days after Alaska's death, Culver Creek feels like a ghost town. The once lively squad is now just two shattered kids who can't even look each other in the eye without breaking down. Pudge is haunted by memories of Alaska, replaying every interaction like he's trying to find hidden clues in a video game cutscene. He's obsessing over her last moments, wondering if there was some secret message in her panic, some way he could have stopped her from driving off. The Colonel, ever the strategist, starts digging into the logistics of the crash, trying to figure out if it was an accident or something darker. Then there's the guilt. Oh, man, the guilt is real. Pudge can't stop thinking about how he let her leave, how he didn't ask more questions, didn't do something. The Colonel is right there with him, carrying his own share of the blame. They both feel like they let Alaska down, and it's eating them alive. It's like they're stuck in a nightmare loop, trying to undo something that can't be undone. As they start digging into the mystery of Alaska's death, things get tense. The Colonel and Pudge start playing detective, trying to piece together her final hours. They talk to the Eagle, who mentions that Alaska crashed into a police car while driving full speed with no signs of stopping. It's the kind of detail that makes your stomach drop because it raises the question they're both too scared to ask: did Alaska crash on purpose? Was it an accident, or was it something darker? Their investigation leads to more questions than answers. They find out Alaska had been drinking heavily that night, shocker, but they can't figure out why she was so desperate to leave. Then, the Colonel remembers something she said during their prank planning about the anniversary of her mom's death. Suddenly, things start clicking into place. Alaska's panic, her tears, the urgency to get off campus, it all points back to her unresolved guilt about not calling for help when her mom collapsed. The pieces are there, but the full picture is still blurry, like a puzzle missing the last few critical parts. Meanwhile, Pudge is deep in his feels, swinging between blaming himself, missing Alaska, and trying to understand who she really was. It's like he's playing a game where the final boss is his own emotional baggage. He keeps romanticizing her, putting her on this pedestal of perfection, even though the Alaska he remembers was messy, flawed, and impossible to pin down. The Colonel calls him out on it, saying something along the lines of, "Dude, you didn't know her as well as you think you did," which hits Pudge like a critical hit to his ego. But honestly, he needed to hear it. As the days tick by, the grief doesn't get any easier. Pudge and the Colonel are like two players trying to co-op their way through an impossible level, leaning on each other but also clashing over their different ways of processing. The Colonel throws himself into planning a tribute prank for Alaska because nothing says we miss you like causing maximum chaos in her honor. Pudge, on the other hand, is still stuck in his own head, replaying Alaska's final words and wondering what they meant. At one point, Pudge has this existential crisis where he starts questioning the whole concept of the labyrinth Alaska was always talking about. Is it suffering? Life? Death? He's trying to decode her favorite metaphor like it's a cryptic riddle in The Legend of Zelda, but the more he thinks about it, the more confused he gets. It's a raw, honest moment where he realizes that maybe he'll never fully understand Alaska or why she made the choices she did. And maybe that's the point, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. By the time 20 days have passed, the boys are still grappling with Alaska's absence, but there's a shift. They're starting to accept that they might never get all the answers they're looking for, and that's okay. The Colonel is channeling his grief into action, determined to pull off the best prank Culver Creek has ever seen in Alaska's memory. Pudge is learning to let go of the fantasy version of Alaska he created in his head and appreciate her for who she really was, complicated, beautiful, and deeply human. So here we are, 20 days after the world turned upside down. Pudge and the Colonel are bruised but still standing, holding on to the pieces of Alaska they can and letting the rest slip away. It's messy, it's painful, and it's not tied up in a neat little bow, but that's life, right? Sometimes the labyrinth doesn't give you an escape route, it just gives you a way forward. And for Pudge, that's enough. Alright, squad, buckle up because we're diving into the looking for Alaska endgame here. It's the part where Pudge and the Colonel are still deep in the feels but starting to level up emotionally. We're talking major character development, messy truths, and one epic prank that's basically the equivalent of hitting the big red do not press button just because Alaska would have loved the chaos. So, we're 21 days after Alaska's death, and things are still rough. Like, you failed your favorite mission 3 times in a row rough. Pudge and the Colonel are haunted by questions, haunted by guilt, haunted by Alaska's ghost in their heads, doing that sly smirk she always had when she knew something they didn't. But instead of spiraling forever, the boys decide to go full-on detective mode. They're determined to figure out if Alaska's crash was an accident or if she pulled a kamikaze move because of all her unresolved trauma. It's like Sherlock and Watson, but sadder and with more Doritos. The Colonel starts obsessing over the logistics of the crash. He's calculating distances, Googling the time it would take to reach the crash site, and overanalyzing the police report like he's prepping for an FBI entrance exam. Meanwhile, Pudge is more in his searching for emotional closure arc. He's trying to decode Alaska's last words and understand why she was in such a rush to leave that night. They're both chasing answers like it's the final boss fight, and if they can just figure out the right strategy, they'll unlock some secret truth about Alaska. Spoiler alert, life isn't that simple. Then, they have this epiphany moment when they remember Alaska saying something about forgetting her mom's death anniversary. Suddenly, everything clicks. Alaska wasn't just running away that night, she was running to her mom's grave, carrying this massive guilt over not calling 911 when her mom collapsed years ago. It's heartbreaking, honestly. You can feel how much that one moment defined her, how it shaped her self-destructive tendencies and her need to escape. It's like finding the missing piece of a puzzle, but instead of satisfaction, it just leaves them feeling heavier. And then there's the prank. Oh man, the prank. This is where the squad channels all their grief and chaos energy into one last hurrah for Alaska. The Colonel hatches this wild plan to pull off the greatest prank in Culver Creek history, something so over the top that it would have made Alaska proud. The idea? Convince the entire school that a real celebrity is giving a guest lecture. And not just any celeb, but a totally random one, like, we picked this name out of a hat random. To pull it off, they forge letters, fake phone calls, and even bribe one of the faculty members with a bottle of wine. The prank is peak chaotic good energy, and you can't help but root for them. It's not just about causing mischief, it's about honoring Alaska in the way she would have wanted, by turning the rules upside down and reminding everyone not to take life so seriously. The prank goes off without a hitch, and the whole school is buzzing. It's like they've brought a little piece of Alaska back to life, even if only for a moment. But after the high of the prank, reality comes crashing back down. Pudge and the Colonel realize that no matter how many answers they find or how many pranks they pull, they can't bring Alaska back. It's a hard pill to swallow, like realizing your favorite game doesn't have a sequel. They have this moment of acceptance where they stop trying to pin Alaska down, stop trying to make her into something she wasn't. She was messy, complicated, and full of contradictions, and that's okay. She wasn't a puzzle to solve, she was just Alaska. By the time we hit the 84-day mark, the boys have grown in ways they probably don't even realize yet. Pudge, for one, has finally stopped putting Alaska on this untouchable pedestal. He's learned to see her for who she really was, flaws and all, and in doing so, he starts to let go of some of the guilt and pain he's been carrying. The Colonel, too, has softened in a way. His loyalty to Alaska was always fierce, but now it's tempered with a quiet understanding that you can't save people from themselves. The final moments are bittersweet but oddly hopeful. Pudge reflects on Alaska's idea of the labyrinth, her eternal question about how to escape suffering, and comes to his own conclusion. You don't escape it, he realizes, you make peace with it. You move forward, not by forgetting, but by holding on to the love and laughter and chaos someone brought into your life. It's a heavy realization, but it feels earned, like Pudge has finally leveled up to the next stage of his emotional journey. So that's where we leave them, two boys who are still grieving but no longer stuck. They'll never forget Alaska, how could they? She was a force of nature, a storm that swept through their lives and left them forever changed. But now they're learning to live in the aftermath, to find their way through the labyrinth one step at a time. And honestly, that's all any of us can do. Alright, let's wrap up the feels fest that is Looking for Alaska, the final stretch of the after section. By now, Pudge and the Colonel have been through it. Like, final boss fight without enough potions levels of emotional wreckage. But this is where they start to find some clarity, even if it's not the satisfying, all answers revealed kind of ending they were hoping for. Instead, it's messy, bittersweet, and weirdly beautiful, basically Alaska's entire vibe. So, we're at the 102 days mark after Alaska's death, and Pudge and the Colonel are still piecing together their lives without her. They're not as lost in the sauce as they were, but let's be real, they're still carrying the emotional equivalent of a whole inventory of heavy loot. They've figured out most of the big questions, like why Alaska bolted that night, but there's still this lingering sense of what now? Like, how do you even move forward when someone like Alaska leaves this massive, unfillable void in your life? The Colonel decides to channel his grief into action, because of course he does. He's the type of dude who'd turn an existential crisis into a side quest. He proposes that they try to make sense of Alaska's perhaps, her whole obsession with escaping the labyrinth of suffering. Pudge is all in, not because he expects some grand epiphany, but because it feels like the right thing to do, for Alaska and for themselves. At this point, Pudge has come a long way from the simping daydreamer who thought Alaska was this manic pixie dream girl here to make his life cooler. He's finally seeing her as a real person, full of contradictions and flaws. It's like that moment in a video game when you realize the side character you were idolizing is actually super complex, and their backstory hits way harder than you expected. Alaska wasn't just a mystery to solve, she was someone who hurt, loved, laughed, and messed up, just like everyone else. The boys also start to reflect on their own labyrinths, their own ways of handling life's chaos. Pudge, in particular, has this moment where he's like, yo, maybe the labyrinth isn't something you escape. Maybe it's something you learn to live with. It's deep, but not in a pretentious philosophy major trying to flex in a coffee shop way. It's real and raw, the kind of wisdom you only get after going through some heavy stuff. And then there's the endgame, forgiveness. Not just forgiving Alaska for leaving them without answers, but forgiving themselves for not being able to save her. That's the hardest part, right? Letting go of the guilt and the what-ifs. Pudge and the Colonel finally come to terms with the fact that Alaska made her own choices, and while they wish things had gone differently, they can't keep blaming themselves for something they couldn't control. In true Culver Creek fashion, the final goodbye to Alaska isn't some sappy, dramatic moment. It's quiet and kind of perfect. The boys plan a ceremony of sorts, releasing Alaska's spirit in a way that feels right to them. It's not about closure, because let's be real, closure is overrated. It's about honoring her memory and carrying forward the parts of her that mattered most, her laughter, her boldness, her way of making life feel electric. By the time we hit the 136-day mark, it's clear Pudge and the Colonel aren't the same people they were at the start. They've been through the fire and come out scarred but stronger. Pudge realizes that Alaska's perhaps isn't about finding some magical, pain-free existence. It's about embracing the messiness of life, the highs and lows, the joy and the heartbreak. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and choosing to love people for who they are, not who you want them to be. So, yeah, it's not a happily ever after kind of ending. But it's real. It's hopeful. And in the world of Looking for Alaska, that's more than enough.